Hi, everybody. First, thanks a lot to Jen for the opportunity to be part of this event of the Safe Beauty East Summit. My name is Samir Sliman. I'm working for Evonik. I am a so-called business development manager and taking care of our product protection portfolio, which consists, among other, of our preservatives and antimicrobial. That's also why I'm the lucky one that is able to discuss with you today the topic of preservation linked to safety during this e-summit. So my idea for this presentation is to give you some basic about preservation on the link of preservation and safety, but also showing you the impact of some discussion that you may have seen on the market before. So with no further ado, let's start with the presentation, and let's start with some nice picture. Life is beautiful and water is life. So you need the presence of water to support life. But supporting life means not only those really nice picture, but supporting life on different level. So when you have water, you also have a risk for microorganisms to be able to grow. And this is definitely a topic of interest for cosmetic, because if we look at the cosmetic formulation, and let's take an oil water emulsion. Why? I will let you guess, but that's an easy one because you reunite two phases. You have your water phase and your oil phase. So what you are offering when having such an emulsion is a perfect environment for microorganisms to be able to grow rapidly. Because what you have is a space, a medium, for the microorganism to be able to grow. So your water phase, your aqueous phase, and you have your oil phase, the phase from which the microorganism can get fed. So you offer the perfect condition for microorganism to grow, which is not something you are looking for, and therefore it is a topic of safety and a topic of interest for cosmetic. There is a necessity to preserve cosmetic formulation. Why? You may think first about uh, making sure that the aspect of the formulation is staying the same, that you don't have a bad color appearing, you don't create a bad reputation for a brand and so on. But first and foremost, the most important criteria is and remain the safety of the final consumer. I'm sorry for the picture, but I think it helps to keep in mind that the most important criteria for preservation of cosmetic is to make sure that your product is safe, that your consumer will not be endangered by using a product, and especially with people with a weak immune system, you don't want to create any adverse effect. So therefore, the biggest criteria for preservation is to make sure that your product is safe and won't endanger the final consumers. So you see, there are two aspects. The most important, the health of the final consumers, but also to make sure that the product stay as it has been conceived and does not show some instability, does not show some discoloration, and so on and so on. So we may think that the most important is to have preservation, whatever it is, just to avoid this issue. So better have a wrong one, but avoiding any growth, or is there something like a wrong preservation? That's something we will see with the next slides. First, the topic of preservation is sometimes seen only through the scope of antimicrobials and preservative, but preservation is a bigger topic than this. Because if we look more from the technical point of view, preservation methods are not only antimicrobials. You have next to antimicrobial a lot of other parameters you can target, you can influence to help preserve your system or to help reduce your microbiological risk. And one of them, but that's not the only one, but one of them are, of course, antimicrobials. And there are a lot of them. And then depending on the region you are looking at, there may be some different definition. And here we specifically, say antimicrobials and not preservative, because in some region, Europe included, preservative is something very well defined and not defined on the technical level, but more on the legal level. And that's where you see that already, depending on the region you are looking at, a preservative is something different. Not all components will fall under the same definition. And that's why I like, one of the comparison I like to make is a comparison between Europe and the US, because you have two different regions with two different situations. If you look on this side, first in the middle, you have Europe. In Europe, our reference regulation is the Directive 1223 from 2009, which is regulating cosmetics, and which contains a positive list of preservative. So there is a specific definition of preservative that I will show you on the next slide, and that leads to a list of what is a preservative according to the European regulation. If you look on the other side, in the US, you have the FDA Act from 1933. They don't have specific definition of preservative. They don't have this positiveness of preservative. But what is the consequence and what are the difference? That's what I'm going to show you on the next slides. If we look at Europe, in Europe, we have something very particular because we have a very legal definition of a preservative. If you look at the Article 15 of the European Directive 1223 from 2009, a preservative is a substance, as you can see on the side, a substance which is exclusively or mainly intended to inhibit the development of microorganisms. And as you can see, we have here an intention. So it's not a technical definition, it's more a legal definition because it's the intent of the product that is mentioned directly of the definition in the of the preservative. So what you can see here is that to fall under the name of preservative, a material has to be with the intention to be used mainly for inhibiting microorganisms. So in Europe, this definition leads to the creation of the so-called Annex 5. The Annex 5 is the positive list of preservative. So if you want to claim a product to be a preservative, you can only use the product used in the Annex 5. And that's what you see also in the middle of the slide. A preservative can only be something taken from the Annex 5, which create a second category, the antimicrobials, where the intention is not mainly to inhibit microorganisms, but they also have antimicrobial properties. So that's why preservative may be too limiting, and antimicrobial is a broader definition. This definition leads also to the fact that you can see in Europe this preservative-free claim, because what is meant with this is free of listed preservative from this Annex 5. So you see, based on this technical definition, we create a special room where those claims are possible. But if we look on the other side, in the US, the FDA doesn't have a special rules for preservative. The FDA makes it clear that the cosmetic market that are put on the cosmetic products, that are put on the market have to be safe. To be safe means also free of microorganism growth that are not going to be to endanger the final consumer. And but still, they do not define any specific rules for preservatives. I want to use this occasion just to mention a few words on the FDA regulation, because we see from time to time people claiming that the European regulation is way better because it's more recent. The last version is, the directive has been implemented 2009, the FDA from 1938, and our prohibition list, list of prohibited substance, is way much longer than the one in the US. I don't think that it's a real debate that we need to have. I think no regulation is better than the other one, because even if it's not written black on white, there are a lot of substances that are on the prohibited listed in Europe and may not be officially under this in the US, but still are not used there. So I do not think that one regulation is better than the other one, or one safer than the other one, because both have in common to say that if you put something on the market, it has to be safe for the final consumer, which is the most important. And as said, being safe for the consumer means also being safe in terms of microbiology. So I think, especially with my pictures, I can convince you that we need to preserve cosmetic formulation, because we have a lot of water in our product. We have a lot of emulsion on the market. So we have great condition for the microorganism to be able to exist, develop, grow. And now we will look more on the topic of, can there be a wrong preservation? Or is it equal? I can do whatever I want, and as long as I have a protection, it's good. Let's look more into this. And especially, we will look into balancing two things, because I can tell you the truth, there is something like a wrong preservation, because it's not only about taking care of the microbiological risk. We have things that we are components that are going to get interacted with living microorganism. So we also need to take into account the toxicological risk. And what we need is to balance both of them. So the idea is to make sure to know your microbiological risk, and to make sure that you have enough protection for microorganism not being able to grow, but on the other side, not overdo it, to not create adverse effect, or not create effect that are not intended, and effect on the final consumers. If we take the example where the microbiological risk is reduced, which means your need for preservation is also reduced, but if you don't take it into account, you may lead to the fact that your toxicological risk is getting too big, because your amount of preservative is too big for your risk in this particular system. So the philosophy we always had, and what we always try to target when formulating product, is always to use as much preservative as necessary to take care of the microbiological risk, but as little as possible in terms of toxicology. And it's really important to balance both of them, because we've all seen adverse effects with some component, but it also leads to a lot of discussion on the market, which are not beneficial for our industry. I had mentioned it before. Preservation is, for me, not only antimicrobial preservative, it's a way broader topic. And it means that you can act on several other parameters, on different level of the whole supply chain until you obtain the final cosmetic product, to be able to reduce your microbiological risk. And that's what is called the herder technology. So you put some obstacles on the way to reduce your whole microbiological risk. And if we have a quick look at a simplified supply chain from getting ingredients to formulate them, produce them, pack them, and sell them to a final consumer, you can act on different levels to try to reduce the microbiological risk. And as we've seen on the side before, reducing the microbiological risk, we reduce your need for preservative and antimicrobial, and will help you also to balance your toxicological risk again. If we look at the beginning of the chain with raw materials and ingredient, making sure that the quality both is a good quality to avoid importing from the beginning some microbiological load, or knowing having the product microbiologically specified to avoid bringing this microbiological risk. Production side, making sure that the hygiene is on high level, that we don't have an in-house contamination, that the cleaning of the plant is done the way it has to be, not to bring higher issues. And of course, you need to look at it until the end of the chain. So also when it is at the consumer, what type of packaging are you going to use? How will the final consumer interact with your product? Will there be a direct contact? Is it a pump? Is it an airless pump? The type of packaging, the type of application, the area of application, all of this is taken into account to assess the risk, the microbiological risk, but also for each customer to be able to know at which level they can influence their risk to reduce it. If we look at the formulation itself, I can tell you that each of the ingredients will have an effect on the preservation. It doesn't always have to be a negative impact. If we look at alcohol, the presence of ethanol in the formulation can be beneficial, of course, for the microbiology, but each ingredient will have an effect, and therefore each of them has to be taken into account. But it means also when you switch from one ingredient to another, a new assessment of microbiological risk has to be made. But each ingredient may influence your preservation. Just like other parameters. I told you the quality of the raw materials, the preload of microorganisms you may bring to your system, the water activity. If it's low enough, you may be considered as a low-risk product. I also mentioned the type of packaging because it also impacts the possible risk of contamination that could be influenced, and we spoke about the plan. But you need to take all of this into account to be able to assess the risk and to be able to be active on different levels to reduce your whole microbiological risk. So I think we can agree on the fact that we need a preservation, not only to protect the formulation, its aspect and the reputation of the brand, but also, and especially, to protect the final consumer. And we have different levels. It doesn't have always to be and only to be the antimicrobial and the preservative. Preservation is a bigger topic. You can look at the ingredient, their specification, the environment of production, and so on, and also know how the product will be used and stored to be able to assess the risk and reduce it from the beginning. That's the best way to make sure that your product is safe and you know exactly how much protection you need to keep your products safe for the whole shelf life of the product. Here, what I'm going to show you is what we call the life cycle of preservative. And that's something we have seen the last years, and that's something we continue to see happening with most of the preservative on the market. They go from a stadium where they are used with no issue. You may see some first adverse reaction, but also some new claims appearing or some bad press on the material that may lead to the fact that companies start avoiding it until the point people take their hands out of it. That's something I can show you with this, and we will stay on the European level. Let's take a component that is considered in Europe as a preservative and is listed as this in the Annex 5. So allowed to be used and it's being used, it's on the shelf in a lot of product and being used daily by consumer, and you may have things appearing. And it can be positive or negative, it can be from scientific sources and from some less scientific sources, but you have some discussion happening on the market. And usually that's where the Scientific European Committee, the SCCS, is getting active and has to check the available data and to check if the current regulation is still up to date with the current data and if the use allowed is still safe for human use. And depending on their final opinion, they will have to adapt the entry in the regulation. To make it more concrete, let's take the example of MIT CMIT. MIT CMIT was 2009 were preservative that were listed in the Annex 5 and allowed for different use at different level. They had been introduced 2009 as alternative for parabens because there were discussion going on parabens and people wanted to replace them, and MIT CMIT was an easy replacement for parabens. So it was used in a lot of product and it was available in the shelves and so on. And you started to have some feedback from the market, some adverse reaction, some allergies, some sensitization. And that's why the SCCS has to be activated, has to review the effect, the data available, and everything, and issue a final opinion. And in this case, it says to the fact that due to the available data and effects seen, they decided to limit its use only to rinse-off materials and to define the maximum concentration. So it's all following the regulatory part. And in this case, you have data that led to this new restriction. But sometimes you also have some other components that are being having bad press, let's say, and you may not have the scientific data behind it to support this. So you see, if I take back this life cycle and show, for example, some product, you have one example I like to talk about, phenoxyethanol, which has been confirmed by the scientific committee to be safe for use up to 1%, but still, you had so many discussions on the market. And even if there is no scientific data to confirm it, and even if they confirm, the scientific committee confirmed that 1% is safe for use in all type of product, the press on it may say something else, and you've seen a lot of claims appearing like phenoxyethanol free, which leads to people being afraid of it or wondering what is happening. So it's not always scientifically based, as mentioned. So you see, what we see is that the different preservatives tend to go through this cycle and tend to disappear, reducing our possibility. What you see here is only one interpretation. The level on which the different preservatives are depend on the region we are speaking of, type of product, and so on. But it's just to give an idea that we unfortunately see the preservative going through this cycle and reducing the amount of possibility we have to preserve product and keeping them safe. All of this to mention that it is a necessity to preserve product for the safety of consumer, for the safety of the formulation, for the stability of the product, the reputation of the brand, and so on and so on. But it's not only the regulatory part that will tell you what is allowed to be used or not. There is also a lot of discussion on the market, a lot of influencers, social media article that may lead to new discussion or to product being avoided because they have bad publicity, or you also have new claims appearing, uh, targeting a specific molecule, so people will start to wonder why, and we want to avoid it. So preservation is a necessity and is becoming a more and more complicated topic. Why? Because we used to have in the past a time where it was easy to have one preservation for all type of formulation. But now with all the restriction, all the different molecules that people may want to avoid, or all the restriction they put on themselves for the specific brand and so on, we are not having one preservation for all system anymore, but we are rather looking for each specific system at which preservation is the right preservation for this one. We fulfill all the criteria and we take care of the microbiological risk. It sounds like a lot. We know it. It's our topic and we work a lot on it. So we want to make sure that we help you on this. We have solution and we know what are the best solution depending on the type of product that is being formulated. And as said, the one solution fits all is not an option anymore. It's rather taking care of the preservation at the beginning of the formulation process and having one solution specifically confirmed for the specific product that you are going to make. And therefore, you always have to answer a few questions at the beginning. To find the right preservation, you need first to decide, are you doing something more conventional or something more natural based? That's the first question. Then the type of system, because the risk, as shown at the beginning with the emulsion, the risk is not the same depending on the type of formulation you are making. And we are working more and more with organic acid. And as the name says, acid means we need to take care of the pH. So the final pH of the formulation will be of high importance to know if you can work with such type of component or not. So it's a more difficult topic, but not an impossible topic. And relying on the experience of a company like Evonik can help you to get to the desired system and to make sure that you take care of your microbiological risk. We know this topic pretty well, and we put all our expertise and all our experience in helping you and creating such tool as here. You can see two examples. On the left side, what you see is what we call our recommendation sheet, where for all type of system and different pH, you can you can have some first idea of what could be the right solution, what could be the right preservation system for the formulation you are creating. And we have it as paper, as electronic version, but also as online tool where you can answer the 3 questions I showed you before, and we give you some idea what you could use and how it fits in the different requirements you may have. So I hope that with this presentation, I could show you that safety of a cosmetic product includes definitely its microbiological risk. So it means its preservation. That preservation is not only antimicrobial and preservative, but is a broader topic. And therefore, we need to look in a broader way at the microbiological risk to lower it and make use then of preservative and antimicrobial to take care of the remaining risk by taking into account the toxicological profile. So not to create any adverse effect that we may not want to have. So I hope that this presentation could give you some light and did not discourage you, because there are solutions and we can help if needed. And now I'm looking forward to any question you may have around the topic of preservation. But thanks a lot for listening to this presentation.